Lake Como is the most beautiful lake in Italy. This isn't marketing spin or subjective opinion, but the problem is that everyone knows this. Annual tourism numbers hit approximately 3.2 million overnight visitors. That number includes overnight visitors only. Day trippers don't appear in the official statistics, which creates a significant data problem. Estimates suggest another 2 to 3 million people visit for less than 24 hours, so you're looking at roughly 5 to 6 million total visitors. Milan sits 40 kilometers south. The train from Milano Centrale to Como takes between 36 and 60 minutes, depending on which service you catch. Tickets cost around €5. This proximity creates a massive day trip industry. Milanese residents treat Como as their weekend escape. Travellers staying in Milan add Como as an easy excursion. The result is that Como town itself gets absolutely hammered with visitors who arrive mid-morning and leave by evening. Hotel prices vary absurdly, depending on location and season. A basic room during July or August starts at €150 per night. That gets you a small room with a mediocre breakfast in a 3-star hotel several blocks from the water. The shape is the thing everyone notices first. Como looks like an upside-down Y. The southwestern branch ends at the town of Como, while the southeastern branch terminates at Lecco. These two arms meet at a point called the Centro Lago, the center lake. The single northern arm stretches up toward the Alps at Collico. This weird configuration causes endless confusion. Some people call the whole thing Lake Como. Others insist the eastern branch is Lake Lecco, with the northern section sometimes labelled Lake Collico. Technically, they're all the same body of water. The naming mess comes from the fact that major towns claimed their pieces of shoreline, and apparently nobody bothered to coordinate. The lake exists because of glaciers. During the Pleistocene epoch, massive ice sheets ground their way down from the Alps, carving out the bedrock underneath. Glaciers work like extremely slow bulldozers, scraping and gouging. When they retreated about 10,000 years ago, they left behind this deep trench. Water filled it, and it became a lake. Water enters the lake primarily through the Adda River, which flows in at the northern tip near Collico. The Adda drains a significant portion of the Central Alps. The lake sits in a region that gets substantial precipitation, especially in spring and autumn. The water exits through the exact same river. The Adda flows out at Lecco, the southeastern branch. So the river enters at the top, fills the lake, and exits at the bottom right. This creates a natural flow-through system. The climate stays relatively mild year-round, because the lake moderates temperatures. The mountains provide dramatic scenery. The towns stack up the hillsides in that appealing vertical way Italian towns do. The water stays cold. Even in August, the temperature barely reaches 24 degrees Celsius. People swim, but not for long. The beaches are mostly thin strips of rock or imported pebbles. This isn't a beach vacation destination. You come here for the mountains meeting the water, for the hiking trails, and for the weird medieval churches put into impossible locations. Before we take a closer look at the towns on Lake Como, please hit the like button to support our work. The city of Como lies at the southern tip of the western branch of Lake Como. It's the closest large settlement to the Swiss border. The lake itself begins just north of the city's historic centre, so the water almost touches the old medieval walls. The town's history runs back more than 2,000 years. The Romans established Novum Comum here in the 1st century BC under Julius Caesar. The medieval walls that once enclosed the town are partly still visible, built when Como was fortified against invasions and rival city-states. In later centuries, it became a centre of trade and silk production. That industry shaped much of its identity. Factories, workshops, and merchants' villas still define parts of the town. Today, about 85,000 people live here. The city centre sits straight on the lakefront. Piazza Cavour marks the transition from land to water, with ferries docking a few metres from shops and cafes. From there, Como extends inward in a network of narrow streets that that still follow the medieval plan. Buildings are uneven in height and colour, but the overall impression is tidy, practical and slightly formal. The Cathedral of Santa Maria Assunta dominates the centre. Construction began in the late 14th century and ended centuries later, leaving a mix of Gothic and Renaissance elements. Next to it stands the Brunate, the old town hall. Many visitors start their exploration at the lake. Ferries and hydrofoils leave constantly for Bellagio, Menaggio and Varenna, small towns further up the shore. The waterfront promenade is long, flat and quiet in the mornings. Locals walk there before the day turns hot and crowded. Above the town, the funicular railway connects Como with Brunate, a small village 700 metres higher. The trip is short but steep, and from the top the view opens to the full shape of the lake and the plain stretching toward Milan. On clear days, the Alps are visible beyond the northern end of the lake. The funicular is not glamorous, but it's reliable and gives a sense of how tightly the town fits between water and mountain. The Faro Voltiano lighthouse on the hill of Brunate was built in 1927. It commemorates the centenary of Alessandro Volta's death. More on him later. Despite its maritime name, it doesn't guide boats, just tourists. Como is easy to reach. Trains from Milan run frequently and take less than an hour. Roads from the north pass through Chiasso at the Swiss border, and buses follow the winding roads along both sides of the lake. The region's geography limits how much the city can expand, but that same limitation keeps it compact and walkable. Tourist attractions are scattered through the town rather than concentrated in one area. The Tempio Voltiano, a neoclassical building on the lakefront, is dedicated to Alessandro Volta, the physicist born in Como who invented the electric battery. Inside are his instruments, sketches and early electrical devices. Nearby is Villa Olmo, a large 18th century estate that serves as a cultural centre and exhibition space. Its gardens are open to the public and provide some of the best views of the lake. The Silk Museum, slightly outside the centre, documents the long history of textile production that once powered the town's economy. Como's popularity is not difficult to explain. The scenery is striking, the transport connections are efficient, and the town is small enough to explore in a day. Yet it's not flawless. The traffic is dense near the lake, parking is difficult, and the old town can feel overcrowded in summer. Lecco sits at the southeastern tip of Lake Como, where the water narrows into the Adda River and the mountains close in. It feels like an ending and a beginning at the same time. The mountains rise straight from the water with almost no pause between urban pavement and rock face. When the wind called Tivano blows from the north, the water turns uneven and metallic. It's not a gentle landscape, but it's compelling. Lecco's story is less polished than that of its neighbours. The area was settled by the Romans, fortified in the Middle Ages, then absorbed into the Duchy of Milan. The real transformation came in the 19th century, when ironworking and mechanical industries took root. The lake became a transport route, and the railway connected Lecco to Milan. This industrial legacy still shapes the city's identity. Smokestacks were replaced by offices, but the structure remains. Today, Lecco has about 50,000 residents. It's the main city of the eastern branch of the lake and an economic centre. It's the second largest city on Lake Como after Como itself, and the capital of its own province. Unlike the small towns that close up in winter, Lecco stays alive year-round. There are schools, government buildings, commuters, traffic, and an ordinary rhythm of life that doesn't depend on visitors. The lake is still visible from everywhere, but it doesn't dominate daily experience the way it does in Bellagio or Varenna. Here, the lake is infrastructure. Still, tourism exists, of a different kind. People come for the mountains, for climbing and hiking rather than idle wandering. Trails begin almost in the centre of town. From the waterfront, paths lead toward Montebarro and the Resegone Ridge, whose saw-toothed profile became famous through Alessandro Manzoni's 19th century novel I Promessi Sposi. Manzoni was born in nearby Milan, but spent part of his youth here. His descriptions of Lecco's landscape are still the ones that define it in the Italian imagination. The city centre follows a simple plan. The main piazza forms the core, open and orderly, surrounded by arcades and cafes. The long lake promenade runs north from there, past the ferry dock and the small marina, ending at Parco Malgrate across the bridge. The Basilica of San Niccolò, rebuilt in the 19th century, stands at the edge of the centre, its 96-metre tower visible from across the lake. Travellers who want the lake without the ornamental layer of tourism often end up here. Prices are lower and the hotel's functional. Bellagio stands at the intersection of Lake Como's two upper arms, where the lake divides into its eastern and western branches. The town occupies a narrow promontory that projects into the water, which gives it an almost accidental importance. Whichever direction one travels on the lake, Bellagio is the point where routes meet. The town dates back to Roman times, when it served as a minor outpost and transport stop. By the Middle Ages, it was a fortified village, but in the 18th and 19th centuries, Bellagio changed character. Wealthy Milanese families began to build villas here. They were drawn by the mild climate and the symmetry of the setting. Villas Serbelloni and Melzi are the best known, both surrounded by gardens that still define the appearance of the town. The gardens of Villa Melzi are the horticultural equivalent of a tailored suit, minimalist, controlled, and devastatingly tasteful. Just perfect geometry, sweeping lawns, and exotic trees collected by people who clearly had both time and ships. Bellagio has around 3,000 permanent residents. The town centre is compact. It has two main streets running parallel to the lake, linked by stone stairways lined with cafes, shops, and hotels. The architecture reflects its layered history, medieval arches, neoclassical facades, and a few 20th century buildings that seem built more for necessity than beauty. The scale remains small. Even the main square, Piazza Mazzini, feels intimate, pressed between the waterfront and the slope behind it. Tourism dominates Bellagio's modern life. Ferries and hydrofoils arrive constantly from Como, Varenna, and Menaggio. Each arrival releases short waves of travellers into the narrow streets. The balance between local life and tourism has tilted heavily toward the latter. Many houses are now seasonal rentals. Out of season, it returns to a quieter pace, and the connection between the town and the lake becomes clearer. The lakefront promenade is orderly and carefully maintained, edged with plane trees and benches. The Villa Serbelloni is owned by the Rockefeller Foundation and used as a research and conference centre. Access to its gardens is limited to guided visits, which take visitors through terraced paths and views that open suddenly across the whole of the lake. Getting to Bellagio requires some planning. There is no direct train service. From Milan, travellers usually take the train to Varenna or Como, then continue by ferry or bus. The approach by water is the most logical and most striking. Nesso is not a destination so much as a discovery. It hides halfway between Como and Bellagio, folded into a steep cleft on the eastern shore of Lake Como. From the road above, there is almost nothing to see, just a few roofs and a narrow gorge cutting through the green. Only when you stop and look down do you realise a whole village is sitting there. Orido di Nesso is the gorge that defines the town. It cuts through the limestone in two drops, meeting the lake in a thin column of mist. The stream, fed by several mountain creeks, has carved this slit over thousands of years. The village simply grew around it, using the narrow space as best it could. A medieval stone bridge with two arches and slightly skewed crosses the mouth of the gorge. It's called the Ponte della Civera, and it looks unchanged since the time of the Visconti. The place smells of damp stone and moss, even in summer. There are no luxury hotels, just scattered guest houses and old family houses turned into rentals. Most people who visit Nesso come by ferry or car, stop for an hour, walk down to the bridge, see the gorge, and leave. The main street, if it can be called that, runs from the lake up towards the upper hamlets of Carreno and Lisogno. Each section feels like a separate village, connected by paths and stairways instead of roads. The Church of Saints Peter and Paul, rebuilt in the 17th century, sits quietly above the main cluster of houses. For centuries, fishing and silk weaving sustained the economy. The silk mills are long gone, but you can still see the rectangular windows of the old factory on the stream, empty, silent, now overgrown. Reaching Nesso requires some patience. The main road, the SS 583, runs above it, with only a few narrow turnoffs leading down. Public buses connect it to Como and Bellagio, but they pass infrequently. The ferry stops here as well, though not always in winter. The landing stage sits at the base of the gorge, accessible only by a long stairway. It's about 300 steps down and 300 back up. Menaggio sits on the western shore of Lake Como, roughly opposite Varenna and just across from the tip of Bellagio. It occupies flatter ground than most lake towns, a rare stretch of open shoreline before the land begins to rise sharply toward the mountains. This geography has shaped both its appearance and its character. Menaggio feels broader, less compressed, with a small grid of streets instead of a maze of alleys. The lakefront is open and level, giving the town a slightly more deliberate, composed air than its neighbours. The area has been inhabited since Roman times, though the modern town developed around a medieval core. For centuries, Menaggio functioned as a trading and transport centre, connected to the mountain passes leading north to Switzerland. The old route through the Val Menaggio was one of the few reliable links between Lombardy and the upper valleys, and the town prospered as a stopping place point for merchants and travellers. Remnants of defensive walls and towers still stand. By the 19th century, Menaggio had evolved into a holiday destination. The mild climate and relatively flat terrain made it accessible, and large villas began to appear along the lakefront. Tourism grew steadily, supported by the construction of hotels, promenades, and, later, ferry connections. Unlike Bellagio or Varenna, Menaggio also became a base for excursions into the mountains, toward Lake Lugano, or the alpine trails above Bralia and Plesio. That combination of lake and mountain access gives it a slightly more practical, less ornamental reputation. Piazza Garibaldi forms the heart of the town, opening directly onto the water. From there, the Lungolago Benedetto Castelli promenade runs along the shore, with nice gardens and benches. It's one of the more generous open spaces around Lake Como, built for walking rather than spectacle. Behind the main streets, the town rises in tiers toward the hills. The upper neighbourhoods retain older stone houses and narrow lanes, while the lower section, closer to the lake, shows 19th century order, pastel facades, uniform balconies, and restrained decoration. Menaggio is connected by ferry to Bellagio and Varenna, by bus to Como and Lugano, and by road to the Swiss border. Trains do not reach the town directly. The nearest station is at Varenna, across the water. Varenna lies on the eastern shore of Lake Como, almost directly across from Bellagio. It occupies a narrow strip of land between the water and steep mountain slopes. The town is smaller and quieter than its neighbours, but its position gives it a special balance. It's close enough to the centre of the lake to be connected, yet far enough from the western road network to feel isolated. From the water, Varenna looks vertical. Houses in shades of ochre and red stacked on terraces, roofs almost touching the cliffs behind them. The origins of Varenna go back to the 11th century, when it was established as a fishing village. Its growth was slow and uneven. In 1169, exiles from the destroyed island city of Isola Comecina settled here. They brought crafts and resources that helped stabilize the community. Over the centuries, Varenna remained modest but steady. The economy was based on fishing, small trade, and later tourism. It was never an industrial center like Como, and that absence shaped its character. Today, Varenna has about 800 permanent residents. The train station, just above the lake, connects it directly to Milan, which makes it one of the most accessible spots on the eastern shore. Ferries link it to Bellagio, Menaggio, and other towns across the water. That combination, small size and good connections, explains much of its popularity. The centre of Varenna is compact and steep. A few main lanes run parallel to the lake, connected by stairways. Piazza San Giorgio forms the core, bordered by the church of the same name, a simple Romanesque building with traces of medieval frescoes inside. Nearby stands the church of San Giovanni Battista, older still, one of the earliest Christian buildings on the lake. Reaching Varenna is pretty easy. Trains from Milan take about an hour, descending through Lecco before following the eastern shore. From the station, it's a short downhill walk to the lake. Ferries connect it to the western branch and to Belano and Colico further north. Cars are not essential. Most visitors explore on foot, and distances are short. Varenna offers the same scenery as Bellagio or Menaggio, without the same level of crowding. The light is sharp, the air slightly cooler, and the setting more vertical. Tremezzo sits on the western shore of Lake Como, roughly opposite Bellagio, where the lake bends into its central fork. It looks open, facing east toward the morning light, with the Grinja Mountains mirrored across the water. The name Tremezzo probably comes from intramedius, meaning in the middle, a reference to its position between Como and Menaggio. The modern town merges several villages, Bolvedro, Rogaro, and the central section called Tremezzo proper, now part of the larger commune of Tremezzo, created in 2014 by joining 4 neighbouring towns. But when people say Tremezzo, they still mean the strip of lakefront anchored by Villa Carlotta, one of the most famous landmarks on Lake Como. Villa Carlotta deserves its reputation. Built at the end of the 17th century for the Clerici family, merchants who made a fortune in Milan, it later passed to Princess Marianne of Prussia, who gave it to her daughter Charlotte. During the Napoleonic period, Tremezzo became a brief seat of local administration. In 1848, volunteers from here joined the Milanese uprisings against Austrian rule. In the early 20th century, as tourism expanded, local families opened boarding houses, then hotels and restaurants. The Grand Hotel Tremezzo, opened in 1910, dominates the scene with unapologetic majesty. Its bright orange facade and Art Nouveau interiors speak of a different era. Unlike many grand hotels on the lake, it never closed completely. The lake's depth off Tremezzo reaches around 410 meters, which is one of the deepest points in Lake Como, only slightly shallower than its maximum depth of 425 meters. Have you ever visited Lake Como? What was your favourite town there? If you loved this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to World Travel Guide.